Are you ready to go? Okay. The Committee on Science, Space, and Technology will come to order. Welcome to today's hearing, which is on the subject of STEM education, the administration's proposed reorganization. Nice to see a full house today, and those who are standing, you're welcome to come forward if you can find some seats, and if not, you're welcome to stay where you are, too. I'm going to recognize myself for an opening statement, and then the ranking member for her opening statement. The topic of today's hearing is the President's proposed reorganization of federal STEM education programs. The proposal is part of the President's fiscal year 14 budget request to Congress and includes the consolidation of over 100 federal STEM education programs. In order to achieve the innovations of tomorrow, we must better educate American students today. The Science, Space, and Technology Committee looks for ways not only to encourage students to study science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, but also to inspire them to pursue careers in STEM fields. Unfortunately, America lags behind many other nations when it comes to STEM education. American students rank 23rd in math and 31st in science. This is not the record of a great country, and it is not the record of a country that expects to remain a world leader. The COMPETES Act of 2010 required the National Science and Technology Council to establish a committee on STEM. Today, this is commonly referred to as COSTEM, which seeks to, quote, coordinate federal programs and activities in support of STEM education, end quote. COSTEM was directed to develop and implement a 5-year strategic plan for the coordination of federal STEM programs. Unfortunately, the strategic plan was significantly delayed and was only received by Congress last Friday. The administration proposed a reorganization of federal STEM programs as part of the budget request in April, prior to the release of the final strategic plan. We need to carefully consider how best to streamline, coordinate, and consolidate programs that specifically engage children and the public in STEM subjects. Our country continues to face a fiscal crisis, and part of our challenge is how to achieve the most benefit from our limited resources in the current budget environment. More graduates with STEM degrees means more advanced technologies and a more robust economy. A well-educated and trained STEM workforce undergirds our future economic prosperity. But we have to capture and hold the desire of our nation's youth to study science and engineering so they will want to pursue these careers. Our hearing today will help us evaluate if the administration's proposal effectively accomplishes those goals. That concludes my opening statement, and the ranking member, the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Johnson, is recognized for her opening statement.
Thank you very much, Chairman Smith, for holding this hearing, and thanks to all of our distinguished witnesses for taking time to appear before the committee this afternoon. Improving STEM education in the United States has been a major focus of mine since before I came to Congress. And I'm happy to see that the increased focus on STEM education across the nation, states, universities, companies, and nonprofits are working together in unprecedented ways to improve STEM education at all levels. We have also increased our efforts at the federal level in both Congress and our agencies to improve the effectiveness of our STEM education investments. In the 2010 COMPETES reauthorization, this committee required OSTP to form an interagency committee, which became known as COSTEM, to coordinate federal STEM programs on an ongoing basis and develop a 5-year strategic plan for federal investments in STEM education. I was very supportive of this mandate because I believed it was important to look at what the federal government has been doing and how we can improve our efforts. I appreciate all the hard work that federal education leaders, especially Mr. Melvin and Dr. Mundy, have put into developing the STEM education strategic plan. Unfortunately, prior to the release of the COSTEM strategic plan, OMB included a proposal in the President's fiscal year 14 budget for a sweeping reorganization of federal STEM education programs. In addition to being concerned about the process, I have serious concerns with the budget proposal itself. To be blunt, it seems to me that it was not very well thought out. While I have many questions and concerns, one point I want to emphasize here is the important role of NASA in supporting outreach activities and informal STEM education. NASA seems to have taken the biggest hit of the budget proposal, and this doesn't make any sense to me. I have visited many classrooms in our home state of Texas, and I can tell you there's nothing that can replace the excitement for kids of hearing directly from a NASA astronaut or visiting a NASA facility. Since the 1960s, NASA has been key in encouraging students to study science and engineering, and I hope we don't do anything to compromise this. That's just the beginning of my own concerns. And I'm sure my colleagues on both sides of the aisle will have many questions about both the process and the specifics of the budget proposal. But in the end, all of us today share the same goal of improving the effectiveness and efficiency of federal investments in STEM education. We've been investing a lot of money in many programs over many years. And while there are many positive anecdotes and some programs that have been evaluated vigorously, we are falling much too short on evidence and accountability. This also applies to the programs to increase participation in STEM by females and underrepresented minorities. It's not enough just to fund these programs. We need to ensure that they are effective. Therefore, I hope we can use this hearing for more than just attacking the fiscal year 14 budget proposal. The 5-year strategic plan that we just received on Friday, after much delay in a separate document, and hopefully one that stands on its own and remains viable even if Congress refuses to support the specifics of the fiscal year 14 proposal. My hope is that the COSTEM strategic plan can serve as a new starting point for more sensible and well thought out implementation steps in fiscal year 15 and beyond. And I look forward to discussing this further with the panel today. It is our responsibility on this committee to work with the agencies and the stakeholder groups to make sure that COSTEM process we required and competes is successful. I want to thank Chairman Smith again for calling this hearing, and the witnesses as well for being here, and I look forward to your testimony and a productive discussion. Thank you, and I yield back.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Johnson. As you all heard the bells, and they indicate that votes have been called. We originally thought there were 3 votes. There are only 2 votes, so we should be able to return in about 30 minutes, and I hope you all will stay here, and we'll come back as soon as we can. I'd also like to encourage all the members who are here to return as well. We will resume this hearing immediately after that second vote, and until then, we will stand in recess. The Science, Space, and Technology Committee will reconvene. I'll introduce our witnesses, and then we'll hear their testimonies. Our first witness today is the Honorable John Holdren. Dr. Holdren serves as the Director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy at the White House, where he is both the Assistant to the President for Science and Technology and Co-Chair of the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, or PCAST. Prior to his current appointment by President Obama, Dr. Holdren was a professor in both the Kennedy School of Government and the Department of Earth Science at Harvard. Previously, he was a member of the faculty at the University of California, Berkeley, where he founded and led a graduate degree program in energy and resources. Dr. Holdren graduated from MIT with degrees in aerospace engineering and theoretical plasma physics. Our second witness is Dr. Joan Ferrini-Mundy, Assistant Director of the Directorate for Education and Human Resources at the National Science Foundation. From 2007 to 2009, Dr. Ferrini-Mundy was a member of the National Science and Technology Council Subcommittee on Education. She currently co-chairs the Strategic Plan Work Group of the NSTC's Committee on STEM Education, or COSTEM. From 1999 to 2011, Dr. Ferrini-Mundy held an appointment at Michigan State University, where she was a University Distinguished Professor of Mathematics Education in the Departments of Mathematics and Teacher Education, and Associate Dean for Science and Mathematics Education in the College of Natural Science. Dr. Ferrini-Mundy was elected a Fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science in 2011. She holds a Ph.D. in mathematics education from the University of New Hampshire. Our third and final witness is Mr. Leland Melvin, the Associate Administrator for Education at NASA. Mr. Melvin chairs the Education Coordinating Committee, an agency-wide collaborative structure that maximizes NASA's ability to manage and implement its education portfolio. Mr. Melvin entered NASA's astronaut corps in 1998 and served as a mission specialist on 2 space shuttle missions to the International Space Station. Mr. Melvin earned a Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry from the University of Richmond, where he also excelled as a wide receiver for the Spiders football team. He became an academic All-American and a University of Richmond Athletic Hall of Fame inductee. He was then drafted into the National Football League by the Detroit Lions in 1986 and also spent time with the Dallas Cowboys and the Toronto Argonauts. After injuries sidelined his football career, he returned to academia and earned his Master of Science degree in Materials Science Engineering from the University of Virginia. We welcome you all and look forward to your testimony. And Dr. Holdren, if you'll start us off.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Johnson, members of the committee. I'm happy to be here today to discuss with you the current state of federal support for science, technology, engineering, and math education, that is STEM education, in the context of the President's FY14 budget, the 5-year strategic plan for STEM education delivered to Congress last Friday, and our shared interest in improving the coordination, efficiency, and effectiveness of federal STEM ed programs. I think all of us in this room understand that high-quality education in the STEM fields is essential, not only to provide our citizens with the skills and training they'll need to create and fill the high-tech businesses and jobs of the future, but also to ensure that we have the science-savvy citizenry needed for a well-functioning democracy in an era when many of the issues facing government have significant science or technology content. The President certainly understands this, and his fiscal year 2014 budget supports that recognition with a STEM education investment of $3.1 billion, a 6% increase over the 2012 enacted funding level. As important as that dollar amount, though, is the thought that the administration has given to how to derive maximum value from this investment. That is the focus of the administration's 5-year strategic plan for STEM education, recently submitted to members of this committee and others in Congress, and it's reflected in the STEM education reorganization proposals in the President's FY14 budget. Before I describe the key elements of that reorganization, let me note that it is a priority of this administration to leverage the federal government's direct investments in STEM education through partnerships with the philanthropic and private sectors, partnerships that to date have resulted in more than $700 million in contributions and in-kind services in support of our STEM education goals. The reorganization of federal STEM education programs proposed in the President's FY14 budget would designate a lead federal agency for each of 4 key families of educational activity. The Department of Education would have the lead for K through 12 instruction. The National Science Foundation would have the lead both for undergraduate education and for graduate fellowships. And the Smithsonian Institution would have the lead for the informal education activities that typically take place outside the classroom. As part of the reorganization, 78 of the 226 STEM education programs currently spread across 13 different federal agencies would be eliminated, and another 48 would be consolidated within agencies. 10 new programs would be added, making 110 programs altogether going forward. The 78 programs that would be eliminated accounted in FY 2012 for about $175 million, or about 6% of the total appropriation for federal STEM education activities in that year. Those savings would be distributed to the lead agencies, roughly $100 million to the Department of Education, $50 million to NSF, $25 million to the Smithsonian to help support their added responsibilities. The proposed reorganization was designed to preserve the most valuable of the STEM education programs in the mission agencies, those most effectively leveraging unique agency assets or serving unique agency STEM education pipeline needs, and every agency that had a STEM education portfolio in 2012 will continue to have one in 2014, with the addition of the Smithsonian making a total of 14 federal agencies active in the STEM education domain. I believe that this new structure will help ensure that related programs are coordinated, redundancies are minimized, evaluation is improved, and resources are focused on programs that can deliver the most impact per dollar in their respective domains. I look forward to working with this committee on our common vision for improving STEM education for all of America's students, and I'll be pleased to try to answer any questions the members may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Holdren. Dr. Ferrini-Mundy.
Good afternoon, Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Johnson, and other distinguished members of the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. My name is Joan Ferrini-Mundy, and I'm the National Science Foundation Assistant Director for Education and Human Resources. It's a pleasure to testify before you today on the proposed reorganization of federal STEM education programs and to focus on the role of the National Science Foundation in STEM education. From its beginnings in 1950, the NSF has supported basic research and education across all fields of science and engineering. The Education and Human Resources Directorate has a unique federal mission, supporting the preparation of a diverse, globally competent STEM workforce and a STEM literate society. We do so by investing in research on and development of evidence-based models and materials and approaches to better understand and improve STEM learning and education for the nation. Opportunities to learn STEM effectively are the foundation for the diverse, strong workforce that this nation needs. Yet today, the country is educating neither a diverse enough nor a strong enough STEM workforce to power our nation's economy in the 21st century. NSF's ongoing investments in STEM education are intended to address those complex challenges. In the fiscal 14 President's budget request, NSF proposes a coherent framework of investment in undergraduate STEM education and an expansion of the Graduate Research Fellowship Program, activities that build on ongoing NSF investments. In the proposed reorganization, NSF would have a government-wide leadership role for undergraduate STEM education improvement. A new NSF-wide activity, Catalyzing Advances in Undergraduate STEM Education, or CAUSE, will consolidate several programs from across the NSF and will emphasize the strong coupling of STEM disciplinary expertise with education research expertise to improve undergraduate persistence and diversity in STEM learning. Development of the framework for CAUSE will be undertaken across all of NSF in concert with other agencies who have been managing undergraduate programs. These conversations build upon and are guided by ongoing work of the NSTC Committee on STEM Education, COSTEM, to leverage the agency's collective expertise and assets. At NSF, CAUSE will be implemented with full participation of the Science and Engineering Directorates. For fiscal year 2014, the President's budget also proposes that our long-standing successful Graduate Research Fellowship Program be expanded into a National Graduate Research Fellowship Program. This expanded program will facilitate the opportunities for fellows to gain special experiences and training in key STEM areas of particular interest to the nation and to the mission agencies. It will also provide those agencies access to a large pool of fellows to consider for training that might be critical to their missions. The Interagency Working Group on STEM Graduate Fellowships has been meeting since 2010 to share best practices in the administration of federal graduate fellowship programs, and it is now extending its work to collaborate on designing the expanded program. NSF is continuing its programs in informal STEM education and in K-12 STEM education. These programs focus primarily on STEM learning, research, and development. The evidence-based materials and models that result are then available for use at large scale through partnership and leveraging. COSTEM has a task force called the Federal Coordination in STEM Education Task Force that I co-chair with Leland Melvin. This task force was charged to produce a 5-year strategic plan for STEM education. Federal agencies, including the NSF, the Office of Management and Budget, and the Office of Science and Technology Policy, all have participated actively in the discussions of this committee, and earlier drafts of the plan have been available to inform the development of the administration's fiscal 2014 request, including the reorganization. The proposed federal STEM education reorganization is designed to provide a coherent, cohesive set of STEM education programs to serve the nation more effectively. NSF is committed to better coordination within our own organization and to participating in collaborations across agencies to leverage investments, all in support of the goal of improving STEM learning for the nation. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify today, and thank you for your support of and interest in STEM education. I'll be pleased to answer any questions that you and other members of the committee may have.
Thank you, Dr. Ferrini-Mundy and Mr. Melvin.
Thank you. Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Johnson, and members of the committee, thank you for today's invitation to talk about the Committee on Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics Education and NASA's involvement in coordinating our STEM education assets with a broader STEM framework. When Congress formed NASA in 1958, it was with a bold goal. Your predecessors charged us to reach for new heights and reveal the unknown so that all we discover and all that we learn will benefit all humankind. This is what inspires us to come to work every single day. For me specifically, I know that the discoveries we make and the things that we learn are directly tied to the quality and quantity of future scientists, technologists, engineers, and mathematicians that are available and inspired to join us in our mission. To that end, NASA Education's vision is to advance high-quality STEM education using NASA's unique capabilities. NASA's education programs are deliberate in developing and executing strategic partnerships with governmental, academic, industrial, entrepreneurial, and international communities to ensure NASA's education mission and vision are properly addressed. I am the co-chair of the Federal Coordination in STEM Education Task Force, which helped guide the development of the administration's 5-year strategic plan for STEM education. I am also NASA's representative on the COSTEM. My staff has served in leadership roles on the Fast Track Inventory, Evaluation, and Cross-Agency Priority Goals subcommittees and working groups. NASA enthusiastically supports greater coordination among the federal agencies and strengthening the nation's focus on STEM education. NASA also supports the STEM education reorganization proposal in the President's 2014 budget. For over 2 years, 13 federal agencies contributed expertise from their education and technical workforce. The strategic plan that this team, my co-chair Joan Ferrini-Mundy and I, provides a framework for increased collaboration among agencies. The plan strengthens accountability of federal project managers, places an emphasis on rigorous evaluation, and establishes increased linkages between federal, state, and local education efforts. NASA's education portfolio will focus on 4 priorities that contribute toward the administration's STEM education goals. Those priorities are STEM engagement, NASA internships, fellowships, and scholarships, educator professional development, and institutional engagement. An overarching operating principle throughout NASA's portfolio is a focus on creating opportunities for diverse groups of institutions, educators, and learners. This includes women, minorities, and persons with disabilities. NASA will consolidate the education functions, assets, and efforts of the mission directorates, offices, and field centers into a single STEM education and accountability project managed by my office. As part of NASA's STEM interagency coordination effort, our available assets will support STEM activities that will be directed by the NSF, the Smithsonian Institution, and the Department of Education. This includes the infrastructure that supports the rigorous collection, evaluation, and dissemination of evidence of NASA's contributions to the administration's goals. The Executive Office of the President recommended, and the President accepted, an FY14 budget request based in part on the work of the Committee on STEM, and the goals are the same. Representatives from the 13 federal agencies will continue to meet to ensure the federal assets are coordinated and put to use in support of the nation's educators and learners. NASA is committed to close collaboration with other STEM agencies and to inspiring future generations to seek careers in aerospace. NASA has the ability to engage, educate, and prepare a future generation of explorers for employment in the aerospace fields. NASA's people, missions, and spirit of discovery inspire our nation's youth to pursue STEM careers to benefit all of humankind. Thank you for letting me testify, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Melvin. Recognize myself for questions, and let me direct my first question to Dr. Holdren. Dr. Holdren, I just want to understand the process a little bit better by which current programs were designated as low priority. And I am just curious as to who made the decisions and who evaluated those current programs. Was it your office? Was it the agencies themselves? Was it Office of Management and Budget, OMB? If you could explain that process to us.
Well, the process within the Executive Office of the President involved OMB, OSTP, the Domestic Policy Council, which has responsibility for education in general in the Executive Office of the President. Of course, all of us interacted. It was an iterative process. It involved, of course, the usual budget inputs from the various agencies, and it involved the use of a set of criteria that were developed out of various reports that had led up to this reorganization and had, in part, inspired the President to encourage it, starting with the PCAST report in September of 2010 and continuing with the GAO report in January of 2012.
Whose idea was it? Who came up with the original idea for consolidation and for elimination, that whole subject? Was that OMB?
No, I wouldn't say that that was OMB. I would say that, again, leading out of these major reports, both from the congressional side and from the executive branch side, there was clearly a need to focus more resources on high-priority programs. And the only way you can focus more resources on high-priority programs in a highly constrained budget is to find lower-priority programs to reduce. And that's what we did. It wasn't fun. Those are tough decisions. They're the kinds of tough decisions that are made under constrained budgets with a focus on feeding the most important priorities.
Okay, thank you. I am glad the funding was increased, as you mentioned, by 6%. And that's a good sign. Dr. Ferrini-Mundy, why was the strategic plan not proposed when the budget was released last April? By coming out with the strategic plan after the budget, in fact, just last Friday, it seems to me that it has made COSTEM almost irrelevant. In other words, if it would have been, I think, a lot more helpful had the strategic plan come out either before the budget or concurrent with the budget. And I just was going to ask for an explanation.
Thank you for your question, sir. The team that's been working on the budget has been working diligently for some time, and we were well aware when we produced our progress report last spring that the work that it would take to get from there to a final strategic plan would be considerable. And as you know, the strategic plan is a very detailed plan that goes into substantial commentary about how we'll move forward with implementation. We wish it had been earlier, but we are happy with the plan, or I'm happy with the plan that we have. I think also the principles that are in the strategic plan are quite aligned with the President's proposed reorganization.
Well, that's really no surprise since you came out after the President's budget, right?
Well, the principles that were in place even last year in the progress report, too, were still in place, right? Principles of coordination and consolidation.
Did you make any changes as a result of the budget?
The development of the strategic plan was an ongoing process, and we, of course, were working through that around the time of the budget release and beyond.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Melvin, how'd you like the Dallas Cowboys?
Well, they cut me, so they're not my friend.
I think you know this next question is coming. You're a former astronaut. You've seen NASA from the inside out, from the outside in, from 200 miles up. NASA's STEM programs were cut by a third, from $150 million to $50 million. Do you support those cuts?
Well, you know, as a member of the COSTEM, we've been working very hard with the other mission agencies. We have been very focused on bringing our unique assets forward to be part of this President's budget. No one likes to be cut, you know, but this is something that we're going to do to help bring our best assets forward to support the administration's budget. So it's a fairly big cut, but we have to, you know, make sure.
It wasn't your idea, was it?
NASA was part of the COSTEM process. So whatever pieces of the COSTEM process that filtered into this budget process that was there. But I didn't come up with the idea, no.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate your answers, and that yield back the balance of my time and recognize the ranking member, Ms. Johnson, for her questions.
Thank you very much. Let me first make a little a comment that could be considered a little catty. You know, I just appreciate the fact that you can sit there and smile and bring us this report that that you put together, and I know how hard it is to try to work within budgets now. I have received so many calls and letters from organizations expressing concerns because they feel that the non-federal stakeholders, school districts, universities, science museums, and many other nonprofit organizations had no opportunity to have any input. So I'm hoping that you will continue to work with that. And in view of that, I noticed that you have Smithsonian as the lead agency, and I'd just like to have some rationale for that and how they feel about it.
Well, I'm happy to take that on. First of all, the rationale for it is the Smithsonian has enormous experience and expertise and success in programs of engagement, of reaching out to very broad communities with educational materials, with inspiring materials. And we feel that by giving the Smithsonian a coordinating role in those engagement activities, we will bring more coherence and coordination to them, and we will have in the Smithsonian a sort of a central clearinghouse for the development of new materials in which all the mission agencies will contribute. The idea is not to eliminate access to the assets of the mission agencies that have been engaged in this multiplicity of outreach programs. We're reducing the multiplicity in the agencies, but a lot of what is being reduced in specific named programs in the agencies will be picked up and coordinated by the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian has an Office of Education and Access. They have an Assistant Secretary for Education and Access. They have an infrastructure. They're getting $25 million to do this. Our expectation is that this will actually improve the engagement activities in the STEM ed field across the federal government.
Thank you. Now, I take that $25 million too and be with a smile on my face. But I can't understand, they have no federal research facilities. They have no external grant-making power. And not having the kind of national stakeholder networks that have been built over the decades with these other agencies gives me somewhat of a concern. Have you set up some type of communication network that would perhaps bring a bit more expertise or knowledge, or do you plan to staff it with someone who's had experience in some of the labs and other scientific endeavors?
Well, first of all, we already have the Smithsonian engaged with the rest of COSTEM in the process of working out in detail how this reorganization would be implemented if, in fact, it's approved by the Congress. And the Smithsonian folks who are participating in that process have pledged to interact very closely with all the mission agencies that they would be helping with their public engagement efforts. We intend for COSTEM, the Committee on STEM Education of the National Science and Technology Council, to be the continuing forum where all of these stakeholders come together, where they can express their concerns if they have concerns, if things are not working out as planned, if important activities are being neglected. COSTEM will be the forum where that comes out and is addressed. And I can give you my personal commitment as co-chair of the COSTEM, in addition to chairing the NSTC, that we intend to carry out that function.
Okay, so you will have active participants helping to develop this effective network to carry this out. Would this be an additional staff, I guess, with the $25 million, and you would put together expertise?
Yes, there will be additional staff at the Smithsonian, and again, they will be interacting with staff across all the mission agencies and, of course, in the Executive Office of the President.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. The gentleman from Texas, the Chairman Emeritus, Mr. Hall, is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll have a question of Dr. Holdren. I have a real problem. I remember things. And I remember some time back, Mr. Chairman, when we came in one vote of losing NASA. And then the next year, if you remember, I'm not sure you were here then, Dr. DeBakey came and walked this whole building out, and we carried the vote by over 100 votes. That was a frightening thing. But I also remember when we had Gina McCartney here before us, and we were talking about jobs and her refusal to use science and making her decisions that affected people and jobs, and her answer was this: I don't want to give the impression that EPA is in the business to create jobs. I think one of the meanest things I've ever heard anybody say with the situation like it is today, people going home telling their daughter they can't keep her in school or whatever. But Dr. Holdren, you made some statements that I imagine you might like to change sometime. But in 2010, you were quoted as saying, we can't expect to be number one in everything indefinitely at the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And is this still your view?
Well, Congressman Hall, first of all, I would say that we are in difficult budgetary times. We are making tough choices.
I know that. Is this still your view, no matter how you reach that attitude? Is this still your view, yes or no?
I think it is already true, Congressman Hall, that the United States is not number one in every aspect of every scientific field. And we have to make choices. We have to decide which the most important areas are in which we need to lead, and we need to invest in those. Just as within STEM education, we need to invest in the highest priority propositions, the ones that have the potential to really lift our game in STEM education and make us overall continuingly the world's leading science and technology nation, which we remain today, and we want to remain so in the future.
Well, you're certainly not attaining that. You're not going in that direction, sir. I guess my question when I ask you, is this still your view? I'll ask a second question. Does the proposed reorganization help to target areas where the U.S. can and should strive to be number one? Or does it do this?
An area in which we are striving to be number one, sir, is STEM education, and that is what this proposal is all about.
And where are we?
Well, right now, if you look at the rankings of math scores, science scores around the world, the United States is unfortunately only in the middle of the pack. We are indeed no longer at the top of the pack in terms of the proportion of our young people who get a college degree of any kind. The President has made very clear that he wants to change that. He wants to bring us back to the top of the pack, both in the comparative scores in math and science across countries, and back to the top of the pack in terms of the proportion of our young people who graduate from college.
And how do you do that? I'll follow up with you on this. The participation of NASA scientists and engineers in these education programs provides a human dimension to the inspiring work done by NASA. These scientists and engineers also provide role models for students, role models, you hear that, for students to enter into STEM careers. Without the participation of NASA scientists and engineers, how are you going to connect teachers, students, and the public to NASA's inspiring work and workforce and expect to get to be number one by the actions that you are taking place now over at the administration?
We are not going to lose the participation of NASA scientists and engineers in classrooms with teachers, with kids, inspiring kids. We're taking a part of what NASA has been doing in that domain and consolidating some of it so that we can better evaluate it and decide which are the most effective programs. And some of it will be worked in partnership, as I noted, with the Smithsonian Institution, which is expert in these outreach and engagement activities. But we are by no means even coming close to eliminating the engagement of NASA scientists and engineers in these highly valued activities.
You really aren't, sir, and I agree with you on that. I just don't understand why you refuse to encourage EPA, your partner in, I'm not going to say your partner in crime because that wouldn't be correct, but your partner in really hurting small companies and hurting the continuation of people obtaining jobs, because if you keep on going the direction you're going, we're not only not going to have any jobs, we're not going to have any employers. So I guess without the participation of NASA scientists, I don't know how you're going to connect teachers and students and public, inspiring them to the workforce with the direction you're going in. And I thank you for your answers. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. The gentlewoman from Oregon, Ms. Bonamici, is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much to all the witnesses for your testimony about what we can do, what the federal government can do to do better with STEM. This is a proposed reorganization, and it's change. Change is difficult. There's a lot of change here. An important part of this conversation is how to make STEM instruction and programming engaging and more effective. And I join the growing group of stakeholders who submit that integrating the arts and design into STEM, that makes STEAM, can help make the difference. This is especially compelling when we're talking about how to engage underserved populations, including females and minorities, traditionally not involved in STEM. I'm pleased that the NSF has funded the SEAD network, which stands for Sciences, Engineering, Arts, and Design. The group's in the midst of some fascinating work on the integration of the disciplines. Also, recent research to Michigan State University, Dr. Ferrini-Mundy, it's maybe your former colleagues, professors found that there are 14 measurable skills linked to success in sciences that are directly linked to arts education. This is about using both halves of the brain and innovation. Those skills include observing, imaging and visualization, abstracting, pattern recognition and pattern invention, analogizing, dimensional thinking, transforming data into visual or graphic forms, converting theories into mechanical procedures, and more. So when developing this reorganization proposal, did the administration consider innovative approaches that include multidisciplinary collaboration in order to encourage traditionally unrepresented groups to become more involved in STEM education programs?
Well, I guess I'm supposed to take the first crack at that. Certainly we looked at a variety of issues around traditionally underrepresented groups, and one of the decisions we made is for now there are no changes being proposed in the range of programs that explicitly address minorities and other underserved groups in the STEM domain. We think to the extent that those programs need a closer look, it should be done in close collaboration with the institutions that provide those programs. So that's something that is a task going forward.
Yes, thank you. I think both within, certainly in the COSTEM plan and in the proposed reorganization, the focus on engagement is the place where there will be enough space and opportunity, I think, to really explore these exciting connections with the arts. We at the National Science Foundation are engaged in some discussions with NEH and NEA at this time to think about what it might look like to fund some explorations in the role of the arts in promoting engagement in STEM education. And so I think we have the infrastructure in place in the reorg to be able to really take up these questions within the engagement component.
Thank you very much. And I also want to ask about a program that's being used by the Oregon Health and Science University. That's the Science Education Partnership Award, or I think it's called SEPA. This program that's administered by NIH, it funds innovative K-12 and informational science education, health education projects. In Oregon, there's a program called Let's Get Healthy. It's been a success since it began in 2007. It provides valuable education about diet and nutrition at health fairs in underserved communities. So OHSU, the university, has used grant money through SEPA to fund these programs. And with this consolidation, there's some concerns raised in the health community about shifting authority to NSF, Department of Education, and the Smithsonian that don't have a public health focus. So can you talk a little bit about SEPA under the reorganization, and additionally, if a program like Let's Get Healthy is shifted to the Smithsonian, how would states apply for grants, considering that the Smithsonian lacks authority to issue grants?
I guess in terms of the details of exactly how these collaborative activities would work under the new structure, you know, I have to say that that is something that is being worked out. We are working on it in the COSTEM committee, and we are determined to figure it out in a manner that will not lose the effectiveness of the engagement programs that already exist. And again, we have the commitments of all concerned. We had, as recently as last Thursday, a meeting of the full COSTEM in which all of the relevant departments and agencies were represented. And we talked about this in detail, and the folks around the table were in agreement that we will be able to work together to ensure that the implementation details are developed in a way that preserve these important functions. That is our commitment. That is our determination.
Thank you, and I see my time has expired. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thank you. And the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Holdren, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here today. I appreciate the work that you're doing and these important discussions that we're having today. Dr. Holdren, wondered if I could start with you. I've heard from many members from the Illinois science community concerned about multiple aspects of the President's proposal. I'm normally one who's very supportive of consolidating duplicative or overlapping federal programs, but I share a number of concerns with our community because the President's proposal seems like it's taking a number of successful initiatives being done by high-quality institutions at the local level and running a majority of the future initiatives through a central bureaucracy at the Department of Education in Washington. I've got concerns about this approach as well as other aspects of the proposal that seem rushed or poorly planned out. Dr. Holdren, why eliminate these grant programs, or in the case of Smithsonian, consolidate them into a single pot for a single institution with limited or no grant-making experience, when there are others outside the Beltway, like the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, that are providing these exact, meaningful STEM experiences and opportunities for our nation's youth? And exactly how will the funds be expended, and who will provide oversight? Wondering specifically with Smithsonian, how will those projects the Smithsonian proposes to fund be subject to peer review prior to funding?
I'm afraid I'm going to find myself offering the same answers over and over again. That is, when you ask about oversight, the Committee on STEM Education, which I co-chair with the NSF director, will be providing oversight and, of course, reporting back to the EOP, but we'll have the participation of all of the affected individuals. When you ask why should we take successful programs and stop funding them, or why should we take successful programs and move them, we went through a long process of trying to decide where we could effectively consolidate, where we could cut, in order to provide more resources for the highest priorities. All of the reviews of STEM education programs in the federal government that have been done, and again I say those have been done on the congressional side by the GAO, they've been done on the White House side by PCAST, they've been done by COSTEM, coming out with the progress report in February of 2012. Every one of these reviews said our programs are too dispersed, they're not coordinated enough, many of them are not evaluatable enough. We have no good way with this degree of dispersion of doing the sort of coordination, creating the efficiencies, doing the evaluations that we need, nor do we have any way to free up resources for the high priorities, such as creating 100,000 new high-quality STEM ed teachers over the next decade, or graduating an extra million.
Let me get to my point real quick, because again, I don't want you to repeat answers over and over again. I do understand what you're saying. I just am concerned when you add layers of bureaucracy, it doesn't reduce costs, it increases costs, and certainly makes things, I think, more expensive and potential of taking away programs that are being very effective. Specifically, you know, what can I say back to the Museum of Science and Industry doing great STEM education programs to alleviate their concerns?
Well, what I would say to the Museum of Science and Industry is under the new system, again, assuming it is approved by the Congress, the Museum of Science and Industry, which already has an excellent relationship with the Smithsonian, will be able to use that relationship to find resources and means of continuing the high-quality activities in which they're engaged.
Dr. Ferrini-Mundy, how will NSF and Department of Education address BioSTEM programs, since training and preparing for a bio workforce isn't really part of their core missions? How specifically will you support health-focused K-12 education programs?
Thank you for the question. At this point, we do not support biomedical areas at the National Science Foundation, but of course at the K through 12 level, there's great interest in general preparation in all of the sciences, particularly the biological sciences, and we have a number of programs at NSF that would be available for groups that are interested in improving the instruction in biology at the K through 12 level.
Let me move on. I just have a little bit of time left, but Mr. Melvin, wondered if you could quickly address. You know what? Actually, I'm going to run out of time. I've got a long question. Would it be all right if I follow up with a question, maybe that you could respond in writing to, if that's all right? I don't want to take too much time from the committee, so I've got a long question that I'll forward on to, if that's all right. Thank you very much. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Holdren. The gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Kennedy, is recognized for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the Chairman and Ranking Member for holding what I believe is an extremely important hearing, and I want to thank our witnesses for the research, the tremendous amount of legwork that you put in preparation today, and for being here to testify. I've got two basic questions for all of the panelists, if I may. First, higher education is an essential part of our STEM efforts, but I worry that in my review of the report, we miss a critical area of the middle skill job training, jobs that require a high school diploma and maybe some additional coursework and certification, but not necessarily an undergraduate degree. I represent a district in Massachusetts that has several former industrial cities that have suffered from the economic downturn in traditional manufacturing, cities like Attleboro and Fall River. I see STEM education as a critical component in ensuring that our citizens are ready to seize jobs in industries like advanced manufacturing, clean energy, and IT. But I couldn't find one mention of vocational schools in your report, and only limited mention of community colleges and associate's degree programs at all. I was hoping that you might be able to shed some light as to, one, how the administration believes these programs fit into the broader STEM goals, and two, how the strategic plan factors them in, if at all. And then related to that, I applaud the work that you've done to focusing on minority communities and certainly female participation in STEM fields, and I know that you put a great deal of focus on that. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that and how we plan to achieve that. Beyond that, I was wondering if and how the plan will assist the economically disadvantaged. So there are far too many economically distressed communities around the country, certainly in Massachusetts and in some of the districts, some of the communities that I just mentioned. I believe that STEM fields are a crucial and critical way to increase economic development and provide opportunities to all students. How can we ensure that the expansion of STEM efforts includes those communities as well? So just briefly, I guess, the economic disadvantaged portion of it and vocational schools and community colleges.
I'll take an initial crack and then see what my colleagues have to add. With respect to middle skill job training, this is actually something the administration has been looking at and working with the private sector and the community college sector to engage on a regional basis the companies that operate in a given area and the community colleges, so that the curricula at the community colleges will reflect the kinds of training that people need to get jobs in their region. And this is something that has been proceeding under the broad rubric of the Educate to Innovate initiative, where we've had a huge amount of private and philanthropic collaboration with the federal government. It has certainly been a theme for the President, which he's commented on and visited, made a number of visits emphasizing this particular theme and its importance. So we're certainly in agreement with you on the importance of that issue and the value of getting corporations to work in concert with our community colleges to get kids better educated for the kinds of jobs that are going to be there. The other thing I would say is that the efforts we are making on K through 12 education are going to prepare people better for the post-high school education, whether it's in a community college or a research university or a liberal arts college, or will prepare people better to engage in and succeed in STEM fields in ways that will help those that do not go on for a four-year degree nonetheless get high skills jobs.
Doctor?
Thank you for your questions. Just briefly on the focus on higher ed, of course, the main focus on undergraduate education in the STEM CoSTEM report does include all institutions of undergraduate education, and the major focus on retaining students at the undergraduate level, whether they are in two-year technical colleges or four-year schools, is crucial, and that hinges on excellent instruction, evidence-based processes for keeping students interested and engaged. So I think the plan, again, has the space for us to focus heavily on the preparation of the technical workforce. And there are a number of programs at, certainly at the National Science Foundation, I would cite the Advanced Technological Education Program, which is all about preparing technicians who are ready to work in emerging areas of science and manufacturing and so forth. As for focus on economically disadvantaged students, again, I think that the K through 12 focus in the strategic plan, as well as the focus on underrepresented minorities, will both serve to help us ensure that high-needs schools are well served. And again, it'll occur through partnerships among multiple agencies, in part making sure that students in high-needs areas get good access to the STEM assets of the federal agencies. Ideally, this plan will make more of that possible.
And I'd like to follow up. We can follow up in writing, but just how you plan to do that would be great. And Mr. Melvin, I'll ask you, I'm out of time, but I'm sorry you might have some busy writing to do. Apologies.
That's Mr. Melvin, if you want to respond to the question, that's fine.
Well, just in the community college area, we have a program at NASA called the Curriculum Improvement Partnership Award Program, and that focuses on helping strengthen community colleges using NASA content in the curriculum. It also supports skills and faculty members to do research and ensuring that underrepresented, underserved, teachers and students in community colleges have that access. And so that's something that we plan to continue moving forward with our MUREP program in the future.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. The gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Buchan, is recognized for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all the witnesses and for your time and preparation for this hearing. I'm all for consolidation and streamlining the process at the federal level, and thanks for your work on that. My questions are more technical about how you decided on which programs, and some of those questions have been answered already, but a focus on accountability and success of programs, and if there were specific metrics that you used to assess that, and how many programs that you actually eliminated actually had data available for your use in assessing whether or not they were successful or not. I'll start with Dr. Holdren first.
Okay, first of all, we had a sort of a number of layers of criteria that we used in this sorting process, and one was to look at the priority areas that were identified in the CoSTEM process, including in the progress report that came out in 2012. And those priority areas were improving K through 12 instruction, reforming undergraduate education around evidence-based practices, streamlining the graduate fellowship process, and amplifying engagement activities. So we looked, first of all, to give priority to programs that addressed one of those four goals. Within that framework, we also tried to look, as your question suggests, at evaluation and ask, for which of these programs do we have evaluations? For the ones that we don't have evaluations for, how evaluatable are they? Do we have a reasonable prospect of developing evaluations? And of course, we had to take into account the inefficiency of trying to run rigorous evaluations on very small programs. This is one of the reasons for consolidating to improve one's capacity to evaluate. So all of those considerations were taken into account in this process, which I've described as an iterative process in which OMB, OSTP, Domestic Policy Council all participated.
Thank you. I'm not sure that I have a lot to add, other than that the report itself, the strategic plan, is very clear about the importance of evaluation and of metrics, with a lot of focus on developing common metrics across programs in these 5 areas of focus. And I'm very optimistic that this is going to lead to even stronger evaluation efforts when we can combine our resources and expertise.
Yeah, I mean, I would say going forward that with this experience from what you're describing, a lot of the programs don't really have metrics and don't have a way to assess them. And going forward, programs probably should have those in place if we don't already have those, because I'm also on the Education Workforce Committee. I'm very interested in this particular subject. And as you probably know, across the federal government, not only in this area but other areas, we have all kinds of programs that haven't been evaluated for their success in decades, literally decades. And I would encourage you to make sure that you have metrics and evaluation process in place. The other thing I see that it actually goes from 13 to 14 federal agencies involved in the STEM education process. And you know, when you consolidate programs or eliminate programs, are we actually going to downsize, so to speak, or make it more effective and efficient the federal government, or are we just going to have less programs on the books, but really the bureaucracy hasn't significantly changed? In fact, it's been shifted to make it even maybe more difficult.
We don't think it's would be shifted under this proposal to be more difficult or to have additional layers. We think the fragmentation rather has been a source of inefficiency. And again, I would point out that was the conclusion of the GAO that said very forcefully that we need to reduce fragmentation, we need to increase coordination, and we need to increase focus on the highest priorities. PCAST found the same thing. COSTEM found the same thing.
And just so you know, I agree with that. I just find that a lot of times when we, so to speak, consolidate and streamline programs, we actually don't change a lot except the paper on paper, and whether or not behind the scenes we actually are making a dent in the bureaucracy. Are we making it more effective and efficient, or are we just putting less programs continuing to be in an ineffective and inefficient system?
I understand the concern. Our aim is to avoid that problem.
I would agree. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Buchan. The gentleman from California, Mr. Barra.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member. And I want to thank the witnesses for being here. I would echo some of the concerns or thoughts of my colleague from Indiana. Change for the sake of change is not necessarily a good nor bad thing. So without drawing a conclusion as to whether this change is a good change or a bad change, what's important, though, is that we evaluate metrics that say, okay, well, we're going to consolidate, we're going to try to become more efficient, we're going to try to eliminate redundancy. And I would just emphasize, as we undergo this transition, that we make sure we have those metrics in place so we're measuring whether we are actually becoming more efficient, whether we are actually advocating for our goals. That's not my question, however. Listening to Mr. Kennedy, I also have a concern. We've been hard hit in the recession, and particularly in that workforce that is in their 30s to 40s. Individuals that are well educated, individuals that received an education and training that prepared them for the 20th century workforce. Unfortunately, we're now in the 21st century and things are rapidly changing. I'd want to make sure when we're thinking about training a STEM workforce, there's this large group of individuals that are highly educated, very motivated to get skill sets to fill the workforce needs that we have. And in this consolidation, I see where we're directing funds to K through 12. I see where we're directing funds to undergraduate and graduate education. But these are individuals that don't need to go back and get an undergraduate degree or even a graduate degree. They may need to get 1 year of on-the-job training so they could rapidly fill some of these jobs. And I'd wonder where those programs fit in a more consolidated program.
Let me first resoundingly agree with the concern you expressed about metrics. And if you look at the strategic plan, there's really a tremendous amount of analysis that's gone into the specific question of metrics and what metrics we expect to use for all of the programs that are ongoing. So we completely agree with that. On the retraining issue, I would admit that was not a primary focus of the COSTEM. And the primary focus was, as you point out, K through 12, now changed to P through 12, that is pre-K through 12, undergraduate education, graduate education. That's already a very big agenda, but the retraining question is an important one, and one in which I think There are a lot of efforts going on out of the Department of Labor and elsewhere, but maybe my colleagues have more to add on that.
I would just add quickly that whether the retraining occurs in formal undergraduate degree programs or bachelor's or associate's degree programs or in certificates or badges or other approaches, there still is the central problem of designing instruction and curriculum in ways that will enable students to learn the kinds of skills that industry demands, and we'll learn a lot about that through the undergraduate focus.
I think Joan and I were at a conference last week, and we saw this whole fusion of the social world with the academic world with the workplace world, and how do we get kids to start thinking about themselves, bridging these different gaps. The arts are in there too. And so I think one of the things that we took back, and this is a 5-year strategic plan. The first year is an implementation phase, but we will iterate and figure out what are the things that we need to ensure that these students see themselves after they graduate and how they can look at new careers, maybe new interests. The digital badging was one of the pieces that they talked about, where students can, do online badging and get certificates for it and actually get college credit for it. So how can we use those types of things also in this new paradigm?
Well, I would add, as you go back and consider the changes that will be taking place, that we don't just think about, the folks at the beginning phase of their life, as well as those in undergraduate and graduate education, that there really is an incredible talent pool here of individuals that we can rapidly train. And we probably do this most efficiently through public-private partnership, where we go, in my own community, we have a large Intel presence, and they're very much engaged in, both going into the K through 12 classrooms with Project Lead the Way and some of their programs there that they're funding. But many of these technology companies are also taking a chance on this workforce and training them on the job. And I would ask us to be open to directing resources in an efficient way to the private sector. So I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Posey, is recognized for his question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, witnesses, for your appearance and your testimony and your answers to questions. Can any of you advise me if the Common Core initiative is at all tied in with the new STEM programs you propose?
Thank you for the question. Our proposals in the CoSTEM strategic plan are very general, and they aim for quality instruction at K through 12 and aim for improved undergraduate education, graduate fellowships, and groups that have traditionally been underrepresented with STEM, along with engagement. So they don't speak directly to the Common Core initiatives.
Okay. Doctor?
I agree with my colleague's testimony.
Okay.
Likewise.
All right, so there is no connection whatsoever to the proposed STEM programs in the Common Core initiative. We agree just unequivocally.
I'm going to say a little bit more then on this point. The Common Core initiative is an activity underway in parts of the country, and so as these investments move forward, that will be something, at least for the National Science Foundation, that we are interested in understanding. What is the impact of an effort initiated by states to make for Common Core standards? But it is not a direct part of this reorg.
Let me add one further point. At education, under the FY14 budget proposal of the President, there would be $265 million focused on STEM instruction. And obviously, in the framework of that focus, clearly the questions of the effectiveness of the core curriculum will come into play. The other thing I would mention that's germane as to what would go on in the Department of Education under the proposed reorganization is a set of STEM innovation networks which would connect schools, businesses, national laboratories, universities to work on the most effective ways to lift our game collaboratively and collectively in STEM education. And again, in that context, clearly the core curriculum issues would arise.
Okay, so we've gone from 3 no's to 2 yeses. And
Well, I think, Congressman, with respect, the point was that the strategic plan does not address that issue in detail, but the budget provides for substantial resources in programs that clearly would incorporate certainly looking at and understanding the benefits as well as any liabilities of the various approaches that are out there.
Well, I think you've set forth the STEM programs pretty forthright, and it seems like the Common Core initiative is already begun to morph, and there's a lot of uncertainty about where it's going to end up. I noticed $5 million for a new STEM office at the Department of Education, and I wondered if you could give me 4 or 5 examples of successful departments in the Department of Education that we would like this new one to emulate.
I think you probably need a witness from the Department of Education up here to provide that sort of list. But I think, I would certainly say that the Invest in Innovation grant program at the Department of Education has been very successful. It has funded a variety of programs that are increasing participation, increasing success rates. The Pell Grant program has been very successful. There's good research that shows that the Pell Grant program has very substantially affected the number of people going to college. Folks who otherwise would not have been able to go to college have been able to do so under the Pell Grant program. I think the Department of Education occasionally comes in for something of a beating in some of these contexts, but in fact, I think there are some great successes in the department, but its own representative might be a better and more effective spokesperson for that.
But, do anyone have any idea how many employees we have at the Department of Education now?
I assume that you do.
No, I would guess probably 35, 40,000 people over there, looking for a job description every day, but I don't know.
We can obviously get you that number.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Posey. The gentleman from California, Mr. Takano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You all know that I have a background in K-12 education as a 23-year teacher, not in the sciences but in humanities, and 22 years as a community college trustee. My question, first one, is directed at Dr. Ferrini-Mundy. The 2007 America Competes Act authorized NSF to award grants to Hispanic-serving institutions to enhance the quality of undergraduate STEM education at such institutions. Despite guidance from Congress, the NSF has not requested separate funding for HSIs. La Sierra University, Riverside Community College, UC Riverside are 3 schools in my district that could benefit from this dedicated funding. As the administration moves forward with the strategic plan, how will NSF ensure that minority-serving institutions, particularly HSIs, are receiving the support they need to promote STEM education among minority students?
Thank you for the question, sir. As you know, the National Science Foundation has a very strong commitment to broadening participation and has a number of programs, an entire division in my directorate that is focused on human resource development and broadening participation. So several programs within that unit that are very particularly aimed at minority-serving institutions. We track very carefully the success rates, the application rates. We do substantial outreach with Hispanic-serving institutions and other minority-serving institutions. And it's an area of great concern and interest for us. I think going forward, the co-STEM proposed plan is actually wonderful in terms of its focus on improving the participation in STEM of students from groups that have traditionally been underrepresented in STEM, including Hispanic students. And the plan, I believe, is to work in this next several months very closely with stakeholder communities to look across government at the full portfolio of investment for groups that have been underrepresented in STEM, to think about the most efficient and effective ways to make a difference. So it is a strong commitment in the strategic plan and for the National Science Foundation.
Great. Can you tell me, one of the areas I'm concerned about that I've observed as a weakness in STEM education is elementary school. We're lucky if we get that teacher who has the snakes and the ant farms and all that, to engage those students early on. But it's so important to get them early. And you all, I'm glad to hear that you're also interested in pre-K. So can you tell me about this reorganization and what opportunities there are for improving pre-K curriculum and teaching, and also what we're going to do to train and provide a portfolio of activities for those elementary school teachers?
So I can give the beginnings of an answer, really, as we're just embarking on this plan, and the first stages will be transitioning and implementing the ideas. But I do know that both the National Science Foundation and the Department of Education have invested in pre-K STEM-oriented programs and work to try to improve student learning in those fields and those areas. And because there's a teacher education component in the strategic plan goal on K through 12 instruction, that's a P through 12 teacher focus, and a lot of the focus there would be on the pre-service preparation of teachers. So the idea about what does the undergraduate curriculum look like for those preschool and primary grades and elementary school teachers, that's certainly very much on the table in this discussion. The planning will take shape as we go, but I think there's strong commitment to it.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that, because often the teachers who prepare for, people who prepare for elementary and pre-K service, they don't often come with that preparation. Right. So obviously we have to get to them in the undergraduate, the general education, before they actually specialize. Can you tell me more about what we're going to do about computer science as a part of STEM? About half of the country's 9.2 million jobs in the STEM fields will be in computing. I don't know if you can. I
can start, and my colleagues may have more to say. But we at the National Science Foundation certainly recognize that and have a number of initiatives in partnership between the Directorate for Computer and Information Sciences and Engineering and the Directorate for Education. In particular, we've had a focus on improving high school participation in computer science. And we've had a program to actually stimulate activity to get more high schools across the country to a point where they have the capacity to offer computer science courses, not just advanced placement computer science, but prerequisite courses to that, recognizing the centrality of computing, of big data, of so many careers in STEM that are going to depend upon those kinds of capacities and capabilities. So we are actively engaged in investing in those areas, and that can as well fall into the strategic plan.
Great. I can have the rest of that question answered later, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Takano. The gentleman from Utah, Mr. Stewart, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the panel, thank you for being with us. Thanks for hanging in there on what's become a rather lengthy hearing. I'm impressed with your ability to pack the House as I look around at this hearing. I've never been one that had quite so many people, which means you're either the most brilliant set of witnesses ever assembled, right, or maybe the sexiest, or whatever it is. Thanks for doing that. As all of you have either said this directly or indirectly, alluded to it, and that is your concern. Mr. Holdren, you mentioned that we are in the middle of the pack when it comes to comparative scores with other nations in math and science. Is true? And I mean, that's not really an opinion. That's pretty much, I mean, it's a provable fact where we are in these comparative test scores. And the rest of the panel would agree with that determination. That's about where we are, right? And, I have this, I actually wanted to stay here because this is a question. It doesn't relate directly to most of the conversation today, but I'd really appreciate your opinion on this. And that is, you have this apparent dichotomy where there's no other nation on earth. On one hand, we are in the middle of the pack and probably have been for a long time. This isn't something that developed in the last 10 or 15 years. In, STEM education, yet there's no other nation on earth that leads as we do in innovation, in business development, in patents, in job creation, in what I would describe as the creative process of taking this information and actually doing something with it, actually creating something with it. When it comes to applying that innovation, doing something that benefits humanity, there's really no one does it better than we do. And look, there's lots of examples. eBay, Google, NASA, IBM, pharmaceuticals, aerospace. I mean, there's lots and lots of areas that are driven by science and technology that we are still the leader and have always been the leader in the world. And again, I wonder if you could help me explain that a little bit or help me understand that. How is it on one hand we're average, and yet when the outcome of this is you're trying to create innovation, you're trying to create jobs, you're trying to better people's lives, and we're still the very, very best at that. And do you have any ideas? Have you considered that of why it is that we could have one on the one hand and yet have this real positive outcome on the other still?
Absolutely. We have thought about that. I'll make a couple of quick points. One is that we still have by far the best university system in the world. Our research universities are the envy of all of the rest of the world. And to some extent, some of the shortfalls in our K through 12 STEM education system are compensated for by the enormous capabilities of our university system. A second point that
and so just very quickly, so the universities are able to overcome what we would agree is a deficiency up to that point, up to the university point.
In part, but as the PCAST study of the first 2 years of college education in the STEM fields also showed, we are still losing a lot of talent that we don't need to lose. Only 40% of American students who enter our universities intending to get a STEM degree do get a STEM degree. The 60% that we lose are a loss to our innovation capacity going forward. Second point I would make is a crucial aspect of our success is having an economic and policy environment that encourages and supports risk-taking and entrepreneurship. And again, we lead the world in that respect, and we need to preserve that policy and economic environment, which involves tax policy, intellectual property rights policy, and many other dimensions of policy, including even immigration policy, to ensure that we retain an environment that nurtures this creativity, this entrepreneurship, this risk-taking, which has produced so much for our society.
And could I just interrupt to agree with you on that? And that's maybe one of the points of my question, is to recognize that these are important subjects that we're talking about with this, with the funding and the organization around STEM and the sciences and math. But there's another very important element to that, and that is, who we are as a nation. And this, as you said, the creativity, the innovation, the risk-taking, the entrepreneurship is something that's also an important consideration.
Absolutely.
Okay.
The one other thing I would add, though, is when you're in the lead, you still need to look over your shoulder from time to time to see if anybody's gaining on you. And it is becoming a more competitive world in these respects. And that's one of the reasons why we have to be concerned about lifting our game in STEM education, because we want to continue to be the leader in innovation and creativity, in development of new products and new businesses. And with other folks around the world investing larger and larger sums in trying to be able to compete with us in these dimensions, we cannot rest on our laurels.
And I agree with that. My time's up. I wish it wasn't, because I'd be interested in the other members of the panel and your thoughts on that, because I think it's worth considering. And I agree as well. We should look over our shoulder. We should be aware of who's behind us. But I do think that I don't prophesy our future demise because of this. I think there are some things that are just inherently a part of our nation that give us some advantages there as well. So, again, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. The gentlewoman from Maryland, Ms. Edwards, is recognized for her questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses today. And I think that you can see both by the fact that the packed room has stayed, but also members are engaged, that we really consider this a really important area of focus. And I have to tell you, you have to register me as one of the skeptics about the consolidation proposal. I want to ask Mr. Melvin, recently in a hearing, and you're like the go-to guy on education in NASA, right? You can just say yes.
Yes, I am.
Okay. So at a recent hearing, Administrator Bolden highlighted some of the progress that NASA has made to improve its STEM programs and to establish the first ever metrics that measure effectiveness. How much of that, and that was under a lot of your guidance and leadership, and it's not the first reorganization, but it's one that, that you've overseen. How much of those measures have been put into place up until this proposal came forward?
So before the proposal came forward, we were looking at redesigning one of our flagship programs, Summer of Innovation, a program that would do hands-on experiential activities with students in the summertime to try to combat that summer slide. And that program, over the course of its inception in 2010, had been redone many, many times. But this final redoing of the program, we worked with Gil Noem and the Pear Institute at Harvard University to see what the dimensions of success would be for the evaluation process of getting this program done. So right now we're in the process of getting back some of that data from last year to see how effective the program is. Because one of the toughest things to do is to measure how effective a STEM engagement program is.
So let me just ask this. So the data that you're in the process of getting back, was that actually used to develop the consolidation plan?
That data was not.
Okay, and so, and then just in terms of, how many programs were actually cut from NASA in this consolidation?
There were 78 programs from the Science Mission Directorate that were cut. We were giving a pot of money to look at the best programs.
Less 49. You looked at those best programs?
We are in the process of doing that right now. My team, the Education Coordinating Council, all the center ed directors at the centers, as well as my mission directorate leads, we're all going through a process right now to distill down what those programs that will be coming forward for the 14.
So how much input did you or the administrator have in the programs that, I mean, in the reduction of the $49 million from NASA? How much input did you provide for that?
So our input was through the COSTEM process and just what programs we had. We did not say, you know, this should be the program, this should be cut.
So you guys actually have the expertise, but you didn't make the recommendation about which programs should be cut or not?
Correct.
And Dr. Holdren, was that true for the other agencies that are impacted as well?
The agencies all provided their information about programs, about budgets, about the evaluations that they had or didn't have, and that information was then taken into account in the process I described.
But the people who are the experts didn't contribute to making the decision about what should be cut or not?
Ordinarily, if you ask people if they'd like any of their programs to be cut, they'll say no.
Right, but I mean, they do have some level of expertise
yes,
about the things that are working and the things that are not.
And we drew on that in the inputs we got from all of the agencies about their programs and about their evaluations and so on.
So, Mr. Melvin, so if you were to look at the programs that you would identify as the most successful programs that NASA runs for STEM, do you still have responsibility for those?
I still have responsibility, and I have resources to bring forward what are the best programs in NASA. So our budget did get, cut. We have got to, it's a tough times. We've got to make sure that we bring forward the best things that we have that we can for the President's plan.
Okay. So, and Dr. Holdren, the Department of Education now is going to get an additional $285 million, and I think many of us would agree that it's important to build the capacity for the Department of Education around STEM. But wouldn't it be more effective to build that capacity and then enable them to make a decision about how it is that they could most effectively run, rather than throwing in a pile of $285 million in addition and now saying, now build your capacity and figure out what you do best?
Well, first of all, Congresswoman Edwards, I would say that there are already many strong programs and a lot of real capacity in education. It's not as if the Department of Education is starting from scratch here. They have a lot of activity, a lot of capability, and we are proposing to add to it in areas of priority that the President has endorsed. And those include the Math and Science Partnership Program, the STEM Innovation Networks that I mentioned, an ARPA Ed to look, which would be under the Investing in Innovation program, that would look at out-of-the-box, paradigm-breaking ways to improve our game in STEM education. We think it's time to place some bets on the highest priorities, on the most transformative potential activities that we can undertake, and we think that the transfer of actually a modest fraction of the total resources being spent in STEM education to those priorities is a good idea. Obviously, people initially can disagree. There's a sense in which transitions are always stressful because people are clear about what is going away and less clear about what they're going to get.
Well, but currently now the Department of Education only really has one staffer on STEM education. Wouldn't you agree that to get this additional resource and capacity, that they have to develop more capacity?
Well, there's $5 million in the proposal to build up a STEM education office within the Department of Education to coordinate a lot of this, but it's not as if there isn't an enormous amount of relevant capacity spread across the different domains of the Department of Education that we would be drawing on to expand some of these programs. But we do agree that we need more focused STEM education expertise right attached to the Office of the Director, and that will happen under the proposed plan.
Well, and my time has greatly run out. I hope we'll have, Mr. Chairman, some additional opportunity to discuss this, because I think that there, as you can see in the interest and the programs that are there, and people who, as a parent as I was, or in community, have deep experience with agencies like NASA who actually already know what they're doing in STEM. And it feels like, why, I mean, you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix that. I yield.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Edwards. The gentleman from California, Mr. Swalwell, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the evidence is clear from all of the witnesses that right now in the United States we are facing a shortage of high-skilled workers in technology, advanced manufacturing, that our employers are just not able to fill. And I represent northern Silicon Valley, and I spent the last week going across the valley talking to these employers, and it's clear there are positions today that they would like to fill. They can't fill them because of not having enough workers. That means we don't have enough students coming up through the pipelines. And I think the short-term solution for that, of course, is comprehensive immigration reform. That includes increasing the H-1B visas. But the long-term solution is what I believe we're here today to talk about, which is making sure that children in our own country are able to fill those jobs one day because of their STEM education. And their STEM skills will be their ticket to the innovation economy. And so there's certainly a role for the federal government to play in helping our children obtain those skills. I believe education should always be a national obsession, but a local possession, and relying on local stakeholders, I think, can really guide us. And so I wanted to first talk about, as we talk about and consider the proposed reorganization of STEM, we need to make sure that this reorganization does not come at the expense of valuable programs like in my district at Lawrence Livermore Laboratory. We have the Computational Science Graduate Fellowship Program, known as CSGF. It's played a vital role in our lab's effort to have that pipeline of qualified graduate students who can go into our workforce. A number of students have written to me about their concerns about this program being consolidated into NSF. I've heard from students Jeffrey Oxbury, Teresa Bailey, Brian Gunny, Sam Schofield, and Dr. Jeff Hittinger, who runs the Center for Applied Scientific Computation. And I was hoping, Dr. Ferrini-Mundy, you could address the concerns from these students that moving this away from DOE could affect their ability to obtain meaningful training and then move into the workforce.
Thanks for your comments and for your question. The NSF is absolutely committed in this reorganization to making sure that we have individual conversations, and those are well underway, with every single agency and every single program that's involved in this graduate fellowship consolidation. And our plan for this is fairly straightforward, and we hope is one that will serve the needs of the mission agencies and the students that they support really quite well, and that is to enlarge our graduate research fellowship program, which is a very strong selective program. It spans 11 different disciplines of STEM and has 180 different fields of study that are allowable, so it's quite likely to span the areas of computer science and engineering and mathematics that would be the likely fields that the students in this computational science graduate fellowship program are in.
Great, and then I'll move to Dr. Holdren. Dr. Holdren, you told my colleague Joe Kennedy that vocational schools were a priority for STEM under the Educate for Innovate program, and I went back and looked at the memo that was prepared for us from your office regarding this program, and That Educate to Innovate program was only mentioned once and is not listed as having a funding source. And also, I didn't see any use of the word vocational training. And I share the same concerns that Congressman Kennedy has, which is that, of course, we want to make sure that all of our students can learn STEM skills and perhaps an undergraduate and graduate or doctoral degree and maybe start the next Google. But not every student is going to be able to do that. And it's just as important that they're able to participate in the innovation economy in other roles, which will help them grow into our middle class. And so what will be the role of vocational training in this program?
Well, as I've already said, vocational training was not a major focus of the COSTEM review, which had a narrower focus. But the role of the community colleges in particular is something that has been of interest to the President, of interest to the OSTP and the OMB and the DPC. And we have been generating, in part with substantial private resources, partnerships, as I mentioned before, that address that problem by improving the curricula at community colleges to better match the jobs that are available in those regions. When you ask where the resources coming from, this is one of the domains in which the private sector has really stepped up, precisely for the reason you mentioned, that high-tech companies are not able to hire the workers that they need. And so they know they have to feed the pipeline, and they're stepping up with their own resources to do that.
And I'll conclude with a concern. I don't think I have time for another question, but I am concerned that right now it appears that as far as underrepresented groups, there is not an assigned lead agency. I understand all three agencies could deal with them right now, but if we are going to move to this lead agency process, which I have concerns just like Congresswoman Edwards does, I do hope that we're not in the scenario where underrepresented groups have no representing agency. So I would like to see underrepresented groups have a lead agency that focuses on them. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Swalwell. The gentlewoman from Connecticut, Ms. Esty, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to return again to one of the issues that was raised early on, which is our communities who have very active organizations. In Connecticut, we have a science museum that have long-standing programs, just as we mentioned, the Museum of Science and Industry, which I remember as a child. What sort of outreach is being done right now to these non-governmental organizations who have long records of activity, particularly with the K through 12, to give them a heads up about how the process is going to work going forward? Because we're all getting a lot of questions in our district, a great deal of concern. State budgets are being cut, and suddenly they're hearing through the grapevine that this is going away. So how are you reaching out to them? How can we ensure proper information is being shared?
Well, let me start by mentioning again that the Department of Education will have a major role here through its STEM Innovation Networks, which is a program that under the President's proposal would provide $150 million to school districts to build partnerships with the federal science agencies, with universities, with businesses, with museums. I think because this is relatively new, the extent of the outreach to these various constituencies is up until now not all that extensive. But it will become more so, particularly if this budget is approved. I mean, there is a bit of a chicken and egg problem here. We're still in FY13, and we don't have the reorganization plan in place except in the President's proposed budget. But obviously, that sort of outreach is already starting and would have to be expanded.
All right, and if we could turn back to the question about, with the Department of Education taking a lead for K through 12, we know from the work being done on science and certainly from the excitement over decades that NASA has generated in school children and the importance of having practitioners, of having researchers, of having people who do science be engaged with the youngest of our students, not just with graduate students, but with the youngest of our students. How do we contemplate this is going to work? How is NSF and our other major research institutions, NASA, going to share their expertise because there's a content there that's important and an excitement level about what real-world science means with the Department of Education, which does not, obviously, they're the practitioners on the pedagogical side. And how is it contemplated we're going to build out this capacity within the Department of Education, as well as sharing that expertise, which admittedly it doesn't have. That hasn't been its mission.
So one thing that the Department of Education does have is reach and extensive opportunity to connect to states, districts, regions around the country. And so we at NSF are very excited about the partnerships that will evolve. And in fact, that have some precursors in previous work, actually. Our Math and Science Partnership Program has had good partnering activity with the department over the years, where the kinds of things that NSF invests in, the content that gets developed, the evidence-based practices and tools and learning materials that get developed can then be scaled out in good partnership with the department, and we're excited about figuring out how that will work well. But I will admit we're at the very beginning stages of this work.
There's a program called the 21st Century Community Learning Centers, which is an after-school program that we are currently partnering with the Department of Education. And we have this Summer of Innovation content that has hands-on experiential activities that can be done inside of 21st Century. So we are currently actively working on a memorandum of agreement with the Department of Education right now to utilize our content in 50 states and 2 territories. So that's one example of how we could start this process of partnering with mission agencies and then the 3 lead agencies to ensure that we get that content out.
And if I may also add my voices to those of Congressman Kennedy and Swalwell on the importance of vocational education being incorporated. I know it wasn't specifically your focus, but it is essential that we have those mid-level skills. It is vital that those get included. For those of us, as I come from an aging industrial manufacturing base of the United States, which now is in that transition phase, it is going to be absolutely vital that we incorporate that and that we incorporate computing as an integral part of this. We've had multiple hearings in this committee on the importance of big data. If we do not incorporate computing as a core part of this, we are really missing an incredibly important opportunity and strategic necessity for this country. Thank you.
Can I just say we agree? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Esty. The gentlewoman from California, Ms. Brownlee, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the panel for being here this afternoon and answering all of our questions. I might be towards the end of the line here in terms of questioning, and a lot of my questions have been asked and answered, but so I will just sort of focus on my agreement really with you that restructuring and consolidating is very important, and I think we all probably agree that creating a razor-sharp focus on STEM education in our country is very, very important to do. And I guess, my question, I think, is focused more around the pre-K through 12 education, understanding and believing that we need to engage our children at a very early age, and there needs to be coherence and relevance and rigor. We've talked about all those things here today in this hearing. I'm wondering if there has been any assessment or look at comparing what we are doing compared to other countries in the world. Certainly countries around the world don't necessarily have all of the same agencies and expertise that we do, but I think in terms of earlier education, we may lag behind. I think the President has already proposed that in terms of more pre-K education. But have we looked at best practices around the country? And clearly, I think Dr. Holdren mentioned at the beginning of the hearing that the achievement data shows that, we are certainly falling behind. And have we looked at also, have we looked to compare really our investment specifically into STEM education with other countries around the world, and how are we doing?
Thanks for the question and the comments. And I agree the importance of the early years in terms of both engagement and also a solid foundation in learning to set in place some open pathways for later choice is important. What I think I'd like to do with this question, though, is ask if we could get back to you with some details about at least what NSF has funded, if anything, by way of particular looks at comparisons with other countries' early childhood practices or preparation of teachers of early childhood years. I just would have to check the portfolio.
Any other responses?
I would have to check also to get back to you.
One of the things we do know about some of the other countries that we see when we look over our shoulder and ask who's gaining on us is an underscoring of a proposition we haven't really mentioned here, but it relates to the importance of the local in education, and particularly the importance not just of teachers and principals and school districts, but of parents. What we find in a lot of these countries, and I know President Obama talked about this when he came back from a visit to South Korea some time ago, when he was talking with the South Korean president about education. The South Korean president said, "You're really lucky you don't have parents hounding you all the time to improve your STEM education system." The engagement of parents in helping to inspire and excite their kids about education in general and about STEM fields in particular is immensely important, and it's something that some other countries seem to have an edge on the United States in at this particular point. This is anecdotal, not systematic research, but it's an impression I've also gotten in my travels across some of these countries.
Thank you, and I would appreciate certainly the feedback. And I think, just to conclude, I really firmly believe that intelligence is something that can be learned. It's not a God-given gift that some children have it and others don't. And I think the investment piece of it, I think, is an important area to look at. And I also, as some of the other of my colleagues have mentioned around vocational education, I think is very important. But I tend to focus more around career technical education, because I do believe that in the earlier years with our children that we have to provide them with the rigor that they need to be able to choose what they want to do as time goes on. And certainly, I think, one of the benchmarks, if you will, for example, in mathematics is 8th grade algebra. And, can all of our children in our country really get to a place where they are ready and prepared to be successful in 8th grade algebra? And that's, a gatekeeper in terms of where kids tend to go. So that's not really in a form of a question, but I was, wondering the thinking around, for the committee on these, I think these early important investments in the earlier educational years.
So I think the fact that the first priority is about improving K through 12 instruction really does reflect the committee's sense that unless we are doing a really wonderful job there, that all of this later career focus and career opportunity really can't come to fruition. And so I think I can assure you that we have a strong interest in and focus on that level. Now we'll work through implementation and we'll figure out how to, within there, make the right focus, but it's quite important.
Thank you, and Mr. Chair, I'll yield the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ms. Brownlee. The gentleman from California, the Vice Chairman of the committee, Mr. Rohrbacher, is recognized for his questions.
I'm sorry that I've been running between different events here and have not been able to participate in the discussion. And let me just state for the record that when we do talk about education, there is a distinct difference, philosophical difference, between the people who come to Washington, D.C. To want to structure their government. Those people who believe that government is a solution and that giving the federal government more power and authority to make changes are definitely going to be focused on this problem of STEM education, and the solution is going to be found in Washington, D.C. by restructuring the way various government employees operate and the flow of funds that are collected by federal tax collectors and are shifted to various power sources throughout the country in terms of educational power. That's one group. I think that I represent, and a number of people on the Republican side at least, believe that that's contrary to what will bring progress to our country. The more centralized our decision-making process, the more restructuring that we do and changing the seats here in Washington, and the little flow of money comes to this department rather than that department, is not going to change the dynamics that are at play in our country, which are leaving us behind when it comes to STEM challenges. What will help, I will note, I meet every student that comes from my district, and I always ask them, they're always interested in education, I always ask them if they ever have driven by the Department of Education while they've been in town, and most of them have not, and I suggest to their people to do that, because there is a huge amount of money being spent on the salaries of the people in those buildings, yet they never see a student. And perhaps it's a better idea to have more money kept at the local level and provide our local communities with the money they need to handle their own education, rather than to focus on how we can restructure things here in Washington, D.C. For example, in Orange County, we have, believe it or not, we have some areas that are very depressed financially, and mainly through people who live there are mainly illegal immigrants and living there in fairly bad conditions for their schools, etc. Although we're trying to increase the level of education in those community schools as well. We are experimenting in Santa Ana with a new system of education for these kids for learning mathematics, and it's all done on a computer, and you do not need the teacher there to teach. And it's private foundation has developed a system in which these kids can learn basic math and algebra, etc., by interacting with a computer system. And I might add, I went down there to check this out, and the kids that I saw 5 years ago were at the bottom of the rung of the testing scores in Orange County in terms of mathematics. And guess what? After introducing this system, they are now at the top level. And these are kids who barely speak English. And I think that type of experimentation that you can do locally, we wouldn't want to have mandates like this, or necessarily having federal dollars being that far out of control of Washington, but we feel very comfortable in having these things done by local schools. And quite frankly, I believe, and I'm happy to hear the administration's going to try to do what's best based on their view of what government, the role of government. And I would suggest that there probably are many other things that could be done experimentally, etc., that would give us an edge and give us a new creative approach to this challenge, this STEM challenge, if we would actually look back to the local areas rather than rearranging the chairs here in Washington, D.C. But I would be happy to let my friend, the President's advisor on science, refute what I just said. We'll go right ahead.
Well, Congressman Rohrabacher, it's always a pleasure to interact with you on these topics. And I agree with much of what you said about the importance of local experimentation and learning from those experiments. That's one of the things we want to do more of. We want to understand what experiments are successful and where we identify them to assist in their propagation so that successful models can become more widespread, and success, therefore, also more widespread. This is really, at its core, about partnerships. The amount of money being spent by the federal government on STEM education is a very small fraction of the amount of money being spent on education as a whole around the country. That's as it should be. We're looking for ways to leverage that relatively small percentage in ways that beneficially affect the much larger expenditures that go on across our school districts and systems and universities and colleges around the country. But we're talking about strengthening federal, state, and local partnerships. We're talking about public-private philanthropic partnerships to leverage this actually relatively modest federal investment in ways that will empower more local experiments, more local successes. So we don't have as huge a disagreement as you might think.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Rohrabacher. That concludes our hearing. I think we've had a very healthy discussion today. Clearly, there's been a mixed response to the administration's consolidation proposals, but I think today's discussion has made members better informed, and we certainly appreciate the expert testimony we heard today as well. I want to I started to say to the members here they have 2 weeks to submit questions, but I assume they know that, and we'll submit questions to you all over the next couple of weeks. Thank you again for being here, and appreciate the interest by the audience today as well in such an important subject. We stand adjourned.